Will New Zealand roll back Maori rights? Described in a report to the United Nations as the most racist government in years, the country's ruling coalition seeks to change policies meant to benefit its indigenous population. The government says it is ushering in equality and progress, but most Maori say otherwise. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is New Zealand. Well, New Zealand had long been recognized as one of the more progressive countries in terms of its relationship between descendants of European settlers and its indigenous population. But recently, a much more problematic relationship has risen to the surface. The nation's conservative coalition is looking to roll back hard-earned policies built to undo the injustices the Maori suffered under white majority rule. Measures from repealing the use of the Maori language in public services, dismantling the Maori Health Authority, to rebranding certain government departments to English names are all on the table. So what could this mean for social harmony in the land of the long white cloud? Here's a look.
The representative of the Great White Chief.
Originally from other Pacific islands, the Maori are perhaps best known around the world for their iconic haka dance. They settled on what were then the uninhabited islands of New Zealand 7 centuries ago and currently make up around 20% of the population. But with the arrival of European colonizers starting in the 17th century, a familiar pattern of disempowerment left them with insufficient resources and suffering from colonial discrimination. Today they are still socially and economically disadvantaged. More than 50% of the country's prison population is Maori. They have higher death rates than non-Maori, and their youth population shows the highest level of psychological distress.
The distance between here and here is unemployment. It's rangatahi who don't have hope for their future. It's the poverty that exists amongst whānau. It's those rangatahi who don't have access to the mental health services who take their lives.
Jacinda Ardern made that speech to Maori just months into her premiership, and her subsequent policies aimed to improve the indigenous group's well-being. She established the Maori Health Authority. She increased their representation in governance and improved poverty rates. But now the latest right-wing coalition government wants to roll back Maori rights and reforms. There are countless measures planned, some of which appear quite minor, but taken together they could have a significant effect on Maori well-being. Among them are the closure of the Maori Health Authority, a measure that's been described as an unconscionable blow to the health and well-being of all New Zealanders. Ending the requirement that Maori children who were taken into care remain connected with their ancestry. In the past, governments had actively tried to disconnect them from their culture by welfare policies. And scrapping the nation's world-leading smoking ban, which was aimed at increasing the life expectancy of Maori, who currently on average die 7 years younger than the general population. The ruling coalition partner, the ACT Party, also plans to rewrite the principles in New Zealand's founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi. It was signed between the British Crown and the Maori chiefs in 1840 and covers the indigenous group's rights under British rule. But the text has an English and a Maori version, and those two documents have significant differences. The ACT Party wants to change the text to include all New Zealanders.
No successful society has divided itself by race. That is why ACT campaigned to end division by race last year. Our vision is a society that honors the treaty as our founding document. Its principles should be defined to reflect what it says, that we all have the same rights and duties.
But Maori describe the proposed changes as the confiscation of their rights and worry that the government's policy shift will make the already disadvantaged position in society even more so.
This government continue to show they have no ngākau for our people. They're anti-Māori, anti-workers' rights, anti-disability and anti-beneficiaries.
While the government says the changes will deliver outcomes for everybody, the Maori fear deeper marginalisation and deprivation.
So are these proposed changes good for New Zealand's social fabric or regressive and racist against the Maori population? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are, from Auckland, Professor of Maori Studies at the University of Auckland, Margaret Mutu. Also from Auckland, Member of Parliament for the Conservative Act New Zealand Party, Simon Court. And also from Auckland, Associate Professor in Politics at Victoria University of Wellington, Lara Greaves. Thanks all so much for being with me. Margaret Mutu, I'll begin with you because you have said that New Zealand's current government is one of the most racist in the country's history. So explain why you think it's so bad and how you think scaling back policies that benefit the Maori illustrates that.
So for the past 50 years, Māori have been struggling to be able to claw back the rights that were set out for us in the founding document of the country, and that is our constitution, the Treaty of Waitangi, which we call Te Tiriti of Waitangi. Now, up until the 1960s, that was just not possible. There was a white New Zealand policy. But from the 1970s onwards, slowly but surely, we were able to gain back our language and allow that to be taught in schools. We were allowed to speak our own language in the courts. We were allowed to slowly start getting back very small amounts of our land. We were given recognition of our rights across a number of fields. Now, slowly we have built that up to a point now where Māori are starting to succeed professionally, where we are in business, where we are being able to just begin to take back control of our lives. What this government has done is stripped away what we have been able to achieve in the last 50 years. And they've taken us right back to the 1960s, the 1970s. It is an horrific assault on our human rights. It's a horrific assault on the huge amount of work that has been done in good faith, has all been undone in a very, very short time. And it has caused huge pain, huge anger amongst Māori. We met with the government today in National Iwi Chairs Forum, and the level of anger that was directed at the Prime Minister and the 9 of his ministers who turned up today was beyond what I have ever seen in the 50 years that I've been working in.
So, Simon, I'll let you explain what you're trying to do then and why you think it's been misunderstood.
Thank you, Andrea. And for your listeners, I just want to acknowledge that for people who don't know a lot about New Zealand and our history, New Zealand is rightfully acknowledged on the world stage for having great respect for its indigenous people and culture. This started in 1840 with the Treaty of Waitangi, which the British Crown committed to respecting the property rights of Māori people and granting them the same rights as British subjects. And it's true that for many decades, those rights were not fully given effect to, but in the past 50 years, what it means is that Māori culture and language has been elevated to its rightful place, and the Waitangi Tribunal is a court appointed by the government to rule on historic grievances and return land that was wrongfully taken when it was wrong to the tribal groups. Now, just in response to what Margaret said, there are many iwi Māori or indigenous groups, tribes that have billions and billions of dollars worth of property assets that they're developing into distribution centres and businesses that employ many, many people. The Māori economy is estimated to be worth $80 billion. There are tribes like Tainui Corporation in the centre of New Zealand, which has partnered with local councils and property developers to establish, which now hosts Kmart and other major businesses as their tenants. So while we hear Margaret talk about the grievances of the past as if no government and has ever done anything about it, in fact, she paints quite a different picture from what New Zealanders experience, what iwi or tribes experience, and what everyday New Zealanders, whether they are Māori, have Maori grandparents, great-grandparents, actually experience here in New Zealand. It's quite different here.
Let me get to Lara. Lara, how can these two interpretations be this far apart?
Well, what we've been seeing in New Zealand is our own sort of brand of populism. So we've seen in a lot of Western states this kind of populist wave go through, populism being that sort of us versus them mentality, or having to target some kind of outgroup and seek these kind of simple solutions. So we've had our own version of that in New Zealand in this last election, and that has included the ACT Party and included New Zealand First. And in the case of Aotearoa New Zealand, about 20% of people are Māori. And we're kind of, I guess, the most visible, perhaps loudest outgroup, and so have presented as a real target for politics, for populist politics in this case. There's been, say, less targeting of migrants. So really, Māori have been sort of the victims and will be the survivors of this populist wave. That's probably the best way to explain it to international viewers.
Well, you say survivors because you think whatever changes this government may make could be easily, rolled back again if another Labour government comes into power?
Yes, because to some degree Simon is correct in that, yes, we've seen the gap close between Māori and non-Māori over various decades, and exactly the same with Professor Mutu. As she mentioned, we've seen, development. We've seen things go in that positive direction because Māori have fought for rights, but we still have these really persistent and terrible inequities that the Waitangi Tribunal that Simon mentioned has actually found over time. And we've seen successive governments, including the past national government, try to fix these and try to move in the correct direction. And I think that that's probably what will happen. I think ultimately we're seeing actually populism be a little bit undone in a lot of states now. And I suspect that because of the fact that the Māori population is growing, the Māori voter base is growing, I suspect that actually a lot of the things that come in this government over my lifetime will be unwound. But it is unfortunate when the statistics have been going in the correct direction, really.
Because Margaret, while Lara says that, we've had other Maori say that they think the damage done potentially by this government will take at least a generation to undo. So where do you stand? Are you slightly more optimistic than that, or is the damage destructive for years to come?
Yes, it is destructive because it took us so long to make the small gains that we did make. And then within the short space of a few months, they're all stripped away from us. Now that has caused a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of pain to Māori, and Māori are just backtracking to try and protect ourselves and protective. We're all coming together. This is how we're reacting to what is being done to us. We are all coming together to try and take back control of our own lives. The so-called claims settlement process has been very, very traumatic. It returns to us at the best less than 1% of what was stolen from us. There are 3 iwi who have been able to do relatively well out of their claims. I have spent the last 3 days with Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei in Auckland. They have been able to succeed not because of what the government has done, but because they got help from overseas to help them build up their economic capability. Tainui has done the same. The South Island has done the same, but they are the only ones. The vast majority of Māori, and all you have to do is look at the statistics in this country, we occupy the worst statistics in this country on every socio-economic. So to try and say that Māori are doing well, we have certainly climbed out of poverty, deprivation, and tried to climb out. This government has been quite determined to return us back to that poverty, deprivation, marginalisation that they have enjoyed and left us servants of this country. That is always what white supremacy aim to do in this country, and it's what they're trying to do. Māori are currently trying to protect ourselves from this assault.
Okay, Simon, you obviously disagree. And tell me also why you really believe, though, that these changes will help the Maori and the wider New Zealand population. Why you genuinely believe it's in the national interest to make these changes?
Well, the ACT Party believes that every citizen deserves the dignity of equal political rights, and we believe that is consistent with the Treaty of Waitangi. But in recent years, courts and academics like Margaret Mutu, and even the government's bureaucracy and local government councils have used this new concept of partnership to interpret the treaty to mean we actually don't have equal rights, that we are intended to be divided into two groups, Maori and non-Maori, with different political and legal rights. Now, there's no country in the world where this has succeeded. This has led to divisive policies like having unelected Maori representatives in public bodies, race-based health weighting, and even racial quotas within public institutions. And Margaret Mutu is an academic. I mean, she belongs to a university, so she would know that that is true. But New Zealanders were never consulted on this change. I want to come back to the individual dignity of each person in New Zealand. So many of us have Māori connections somewhere in our family trees. It does seem extraordinarily arbitrary to claim that somebody has special political rights or special rights because overnight they discovered one of their ancestors or a great-grandparent was Māori. That is a divisive bicultural approach. It doesn't reflect our blended, modern, integrated, multi-ethnic New Zealand, mostly made up of immigrants who've come to New Zealand in the past 150 years. So one of the questions our party, the ACT Party, asks, who we're actually not a conservative party, we're actually a liberal party, we ask, where do all the immigrants fit into the conversation? When do they become citizens? The ACT Party believes we should all have the same rights as of citizens, not any group be treated as second class, certainly not Māori, certainly not immigrants, and certainly not people whose ancestors signed the treaty with the Māori, on the intention that we actually all grow wealthier, grow economically, share our cultures, share our technology, and become a modern country as we have. You know, it's 2024. A lot of the things Margaret's talking about, she's right. They were true in the 1960s, but they're certainly not true in the 21st century.
Okay, Lara, let me ask you this. You know, there doesn't seem to be much solid polling regarding how New Zealanders actually feel about these changes from what I've seen. So will this national referendum that's been talked about maybe help solve that? And would it be democratic to see how wider New Zealand feels about these changes through a vote?
Well, what we've seen in terms of polling is that our media sector really has been dying, unfortunately. So we're only a small nation of about 5 million people, and we haven't been able to really sustain the diversity of media voices nor sustain regular polling. What we do know from public opinion surveys like the New Zealand Election Study, the World Values Survey going back, is that all New Zealanders have become more and more accepting of Te Tiriti and of Māori and of intergroup relations, or whatever you want to call it, over time. There are still pockets, however, that are quite mad and quite angry at Māori and are quite kind of disenfranchised by Māori and potentially, you know, some people will call them racist. And those people, I think, if we do progress to a referendum, we will see, you know, a lot of division. We will see that group be the loudest voice. I would also add that referendums are not the best device for this kind of huge constitutional discussion. We've actually already had various constitutional discussions. Professor Mutu led one, a Māori-led one. But we've had these discussions before. We have different pathways forward. So having a referendum, which is going to be like a yes/no answer that people will just vote on, you know, just through hearing this or hearing that and not really have the time to consider in depth, is not going to be the best device for this. And in fact, through the coalition agreements, we are going to have referendums in our next local government elections on the Māori wards, which are reserved seats in local government. So we're going to have a preview of that quite soon in 2025.
Okay. Margaret, let me ask you, because if these, you know, proposals are pushed through and they are instituted, tell us, one, like, for example, how will Maori health suffer? There are, you know, anti-smoking initiatives potentially being repealed now because of the government's arguments that they have increased crime and the black market. There's also issues with the environment and that the government is getting rid of Maori-based approaches to environmental issues. And explain where you think the greatest damage would actually be done, especially with health and the environment.
So in terms of health, and I need to point out here that I'm not just the professor of Maori studies either. I'm also the leader of my own nation. And so I deal with my people on a day-to-day basis on the ground, and I see what happens to them. In the health sector, our people have never, ever had the same access to the health services in this country that everyone else has. And that's the assumption that ACT is putting up and hoping people will believe, is that everybody is treated equally. They are not. And Māori have long, and still to this day, we do not have access to health services in the way the rest of the country does. That is why our health statistics are so bad. So what we have said is, give us our own health authority so that we make the decisions on how to make sure that our people do access the health services. This government has moved unilaterally, without discussion with us at all, to remove that. So we once again are denied access to health services in this country. Environmentally, Māori are, because we are the indigenous people of this country, we are responsible for the well-being and the continued existence of the Mother Earth in this country. And yet we watch the recent immigrants, those we invited in under the treaty, carry out incredible environmental destruction. And we have been saying to them for decades and decades now, you cannot keep doing this. You are killing the very thing that supports the fact that you even have life in this country. This government is repealing all of those advances we managed to make, which ensured that Māori could protect the life-giving power of the Mother Earth and make sure that everybody could live peacefully and productively in our land. But no, they want to go and exploit and ruin and destroy a lot of the very good progress we've been able to make in the environmental area. That has all been rolled back. So as I said, today that all came out, and the Māori leaders throughout the country met, and we sent a very direct message to the government. You must stop what you are doing. You are destroying yourselves as well as the country, as well as Māori.
Okay, Simon, go ahead.
Well, it's disappointing to hear Professor Mutu categorise what's happening in New Zealand in that way. I mean, my background is as an environmental scientist and engineer. I studied and trained in order to find ways to protect water quality and to enhance the environment. And I now have a role in government in redesigning the resource management system so that we can better protect the environment. Because actually, Professor Mutu is right. We haven't protected our environment and improved things in the way that we should. But at the same time, we have not been able to develop our infrastructure, build affordable homes in our cities. In fact, our entire planning system is slowed down and is congealed as a result of bureaucracy and red tape. And that affects everybody, including Māori. I also want to acknowledge that Professor Mutu is correct. For many people who live in rural and remote communities, which include a large number of Māori people, access to health services has not been good. And that's one of the reasons why ACT says, instead of this clunky, really unhelpful approach to categorizing people's need by race, which is what the previous government did, say if you are Māori, you have a higher need. Actually, let's be clear, if you live in a remote community and you're 2 or 3 hours drive from your doctor, you have a higher need. And it turns out that a lot of those people are Māori. And let's just focus on what ACT says is we should just focus on making sure people's needs are met through the health system, needs are met through affordable housing. We can develop our infrastructure. We have modern ways of funding and financing it. You're not just relying on the taxpayer. And when it comes to the environment, that we can all agree that there are some very special places we want to protect, whether you're Māori, whether you're a new immigrant to New Zealand, whether you're flying in as a tourist and you've seen all the wonderful places that New Zealand has to offer to tourists. We know we want to protect those places. Those are shared values. And that's one of the reasons why the ACT Party actually does want to have a referendum on the Treaty of Waitangi. We would like New Zealanders to agree what it means to us for the next 50 or 100 years, not necessarily what it means looking backwards in the rearview mirror like Margaret has in her role as an academic, analysing the problems of the past. We think New Zealand's ready to face forward, and to embrace our future as a multi-ethnic country where
Okay.
we all have equal rights and dignity.
We're down to our last minute and a half. So, Lara, let me ask you, is there a healthy middle ground to be found here, given the arguments we've heard on both sides? Or do you think this is just genuinely going in the wrong direction, and unless another government comes into power, it won't be stopped?
I actually really honestly hope that there is, and that we can have like these longer form discussions where we recognize issues like inequality, housing inequality, the ridiculous house prices, and figure out how to, discuss these issues and come to an actual solution, rather than what we've kind of gone to in a lot of New Zealand politics at the moment, which is the need to fight, the need for Māori to fight for rights and to be able to get heard in any way, to have to kind of walk away from a meeting. That is the current state of affairs. So I'm hoping there's a really positive way forward, but ultimately I think perhaps this speaks to potential changes to our electoral system or potential some kind of changes to our system going forward. But like I mentioned before, we've had these discussions. We've had Mātiki Mai, which Professor Mutu led. We've had the Constitutional Kōrero. We've had these discussions before and nothing has come of them. So currently we are in this deadlock.
Okay, Lara, that will have to be, unfortunately, the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd really like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us. Incredibly insightful discussion. And I, of course, thank our viewers as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see all of our programs. I'm Andrea Sankey. We will see you next time.